welcome to our group presentation. The overall topic that we decided to focus on is how technology affects students' academic performance through multiple different aspects. And the topic that I decided to focus on is how the use of cell phones in the class can affect students' academic performance. I decided to address this topic because, as times change and technology advances, cell phones are becoming part of our everyday lives. The issues with the use of cell phones are that they cause distractions in not only students, but to educators as well during class lectures, causing them to miss key concepts as well as perform poorly in their academic studies. This topic was necessary to talk about because in today's society, mostly every student has a phone that they tend to use during class. Hypotheses and methods. The hypothesis that was tested was students who use their phones in the class for educational purposes perform better than those students who do not. To collect my data, informed consent was first collected by the participants, which were freshman students of all races from Cal State University, Long Beach. The interviews were held on a face-to-face basis in the afternoon that consisted of 14 males and 12 females between the ages of 18 and 24. The reason why we targeted freshman students was because we wanted to see how incoming students reacted to using their cell phones in a university setting. The study consisted of nominal and scale-based questions. One of my nominal questions was, how often would you say you pull out your phone during class on a daily basis? Where students either responded with none, once, twice, or many times. One of my scale questions was where we asked participants to rate on a scale of 1 to 9 on how they felt to the statement, pulling out your phone in class has helped you achieve good grades in your courses. Results and findings. A bar chart was created regarding the hypotheses that compared whether if pulling out their phones in classes helped them achieve good grades or not. The x-axis showed how many times students use their phone in class, while on the y-axis was the responses that students gave on a scale of 1 to 9 based on whether if they have helped them get better grades or not. The overall scores from this graph show that students who didn't use their phones at all in the class had an average score of 5.9 out of 9, whereas those students who used their phones once had an average score of 5.75. And those who used their phones twice or more had scores of 4.25 out of 9, indicating that those students who didn't use their phones at all had the highest chance of achieving good grades. Also, the error bars shown in the graph indicate the standard deviation within each category, and the larger the whisker, the more standard deviation that exists. With that being said, the results proved the hypothesis incorrect, proving that as students use their phones less, the more they are likely to get better overall grades in the class. Shortcomings, limitations, and future studies. There are multiple shortcomings and limitations that came to mind, such as the unbalanced participants that could have likely affected the outcome due to the fact that more men than women participated in the study. It would be unfair to say that this study was intended for every freshman student attending Cal State University, Long Beach. Another limitation that existed would be that, realistically, we do not know if participants are giving their honest opinions on the topic, causing the results to be inaccurate. Some future directions could include a different protocol from this study because this study focused on targeting only freshman students from Cal State University, Long Beach. But if future studies were to include a wider sample population from different locations and times, then it will be more effective.
Hey everyone, my name is Adrian, and my topic that I decided to look into is video games and education. More so, I wanted to address if the presence of video games benefit or drawback academic achievement within the students in our education system. I believe it was necessary to touch on this topic because in the society that we live in with so many technological advances and with so many schools having switched to an online digital learning environment, there's no doubt that there could be a concept of video game-based learning. One of the main issues with this topic of video game-based learning is if it can be so beneficial to the point where we can replace the typical pencil, paper, or lecture teaching style that we're all familiar with. Also, there seems to be a debate whether video game-based learning is full of negative aspects versus the positives. All right, now onto my hypothesis and the methods I use to collect data in my research study. One of the hypotheses I used to formulate my research states that classes which incorporate video game usage should perform academically better. In order to get the data to test this hypothesis, the method I used consisted of short face-to-face interviews with the use of a survey, and the participants consisted of students at Cal State Long Beach. Some of the questions I asked in the survey, which directly gave me insight on my topic, had a mix of both nominal and scale type questions. One of my nominal questions was, what would you imagine the experience of playing an educational video game is like? The options provided were A, boring, B, the same as regular video games, C, fun, and D, hard. And an example of a scale question was, given your personal experience with how instructors deal with technology, how would you rate your instructor's knowledge on assessing a video game in the classroom? The scale we use ranged from number 1 being the weakest rating, all the way to 9 being the strongest. So the graph I created in order to help prove my hypothesis that I mentioned was a bar chart. For the chart, the two variables used were one scale question and one nominal. The scale question was titled Scale 9, which is on my y-axis, and it was used to find out if the participants felt it was easier to get good grades in an online digital environment rather than the traditional style of teaching, which is face-to-face. And the nominal question, which is on my x-axis, ask the participants whether they feel there are more benefits or negatives to using video games in a way of teaching. Now, in order to read the bar chart, we can see that the error bars do touch each other, signifying that there is hardly any significant difference between the two bars. But when we look at the overall percentages of each bar, 63.3% of the participants believe that there are more benefits to video game usage compared to the 33.7% who consider there to be more negatives. Now onto my last slide. I found that because more than half of the sample population for my hypothesis agreed in terms that there can be more benefits to video games than negatives on my bar chart, that this information supports my hypothesis, which states classes which incorporate video game usage should perform academically better. Some of the limitations to my study could have been the population I targeted. Using only Cal State Long Beach students, this limited the viewpoints I could receive from my topic. Also conducting face-to-face interviews, along with a survey, might have given some bias to responses because this could have shifted the participants' answers to make it to where they won't feel uncomfortable. And some future considerations I can make to the research would be to target a wider range of participants. Since I focused on the students of Cal State Long Beach, the mean average for the age that I gathered was 19 to 23-year-olds, giving us the perspective of individuals who are well aware of technology and its purposes. However, if the same study were to be performed on individuals who range anywhere 50 years and up, I would predict that the results for this study would skew to the negative side of video games. The odds can also vary if the study were to be performed and adjusted to target an elementary school population. I would assume that with kids, there's no doubt everyone would be on board with using video games. So the factor that would be focused on more in this case would be on the effectiveness it has on learning and test results like the STAR test.
All right, so my topic is cyberbullying can be prevented if students refrain from using technology. Now, why did I address it? Well, mental health, especially in society today, is important to maintain. Mental health consists of our mental and psychological well-being. It determines how we handle stress and how to cope. Bullying and cyberbullying is predominantly the leading cause of uprise in mental illness. Now, what are the issues with cyberbullying? Unfortunately, cyberbullying is something we can't control. As opposed to face-to-face bullying, we aren't able to see who our bullier is. Especially with how vast our technology is, people are able to hide behind screens and create some form of bullying without getting caught. Now, why is it necessary to talk about this? Well, it's necessary to bring awareness to society and how much one single person can cause harm to another. It doesn't take long for a person to expose another individual through social media. We as a society need to bring awareness regarding cyberbullying to the public in order to prevent an individual from being diagnosed with a mental illness. So my hypothesis is abstaining from using social media will prevent cyberbullying from occurring. Now, how was data collected? The way I gathered data, it was collected by distributing surveys that consisted of various questions. It was also collected in person on campus between the hours of 5 from 8 to 5 p.m. So here you can see my results and findings. For this research, I used a cluster bar to gather the information that pertains to the rate of prevention of cyberbullying. I asked various students based on their education level how successful it would be from abstaining from the use of technology. As we can see, the chart shows the majority of the high school participants agreed that the abstinence of technology would decrease the rate of cyberbullying. On the other hand, we're able to see that elementary students and a portion of high school students believe that cyberbullying will not be successful when not using technology. Shortcomings, limitations, and future studies. The shortcomings and limitations include the lack of participants that I had, inaccurate answers, and mainly my focus was high school and college students as opposed to the other grade levels. What I could do for future studies, or what I can consider for future studies, would be to evenly distribute the focus to all grade levels. My overall conclusion was that we can conclude that it had a neutral result. For instance, if we only looked at the total participant, which was 5, who agreed that cyberbullying prevention would be successful, it was also the same number of students, again, which was 5, who disagreed that prevention would be successful. However, the data does show that 8 participants found that the prevention would be rarely successful.
Hi everyone, my name is Jocelyn Cabral, and the topic that I'm covering is social media affects a student's learning ability. Technology has had a huge impact on society as many people around the world use devices such as cell phones, computers, and much more. With these devices come plenty of different apps such as social media, health, entertainment, and education. The thing that I want to address is the impact that social media has had on education and how it could affect the students' academic performance. Perhaps it can be a learning tool for students, as there are plenty of ways that social media can help with students' engagement, motivation, and communication. Social media can be presented as a learning tool to help engage students with the lesson or simply communicating with each other through DMs or chat rooms. For example, teachers have actually encouraged the use of social media as a way for students to communicate with each other, or using educational YouTube videos as a way for a lesson plan, or simply to motivate their students. However, there can be plenty of different issues surrounding the use of social media that can have an effect on a student's learning ability. One of the main causes is distraction. A student could be distracted by social media through their phones, or they could often be misusing it. It's necessary to conduct a study to see if social media can affect a student's learning ability in a negative or positive outcome. Through my hypothesis for this research is students often use social media for educational purposes, which can improve their academic performance. I wanted to test my hypothesis to see if social media can actually improve a student's academic performance, so I put that to the test. Therefore, in the method section, I tested my hypothesis through surveys my groupmates and I created. In the method sections, in order to attain the results of my hypothesis, we collected data through a survey. In the survey was about 32 questions based on our topic, how technology affects academic performance. Once we completed the survey and created the consent forms explaining what and why we were conducting this study, we move on to campus, Cal State Long Beach, to find participants to do our survey. So we did between the morning classes to ask if students were willing to participate in our study. If they agree, I gave them a consent form, and then I proceeded to give them the survey. It took them about roughly 10 to 15 minutes to complete. In total, I had about 30 participants participated. So for my survey's question for number 22, how often do you use social media for educational purposes? Participants were either had to choose A, B, C, D, or E. And then for number 8, you believe that social media can increase a student's learning ability? Participants had a choice to choose between 1 through 9, as 1 was the weakest and 9 was the strongest. So moving on to my results and finding. With the help of the participants, we were able to get results for our hypothesis and determine what was our end results. I created a bar chart where the y-axis is a scale variable, which was you believe that social media can increase a student's learning ability, and the x-axis is a nominal. How often do you use social media for educational purposes? The hypothesis was supported according to the results of the bar graph, provided that 6 students never use social media for educational purposes, as presented on the left side of the graph, and to the right were 4 students that very often use social media for educational purposes. However, in the somewhat, there are about 7 students that were in between, are often and never use social media for educational use. The bar chart showed that there is a slight significant differences between students that never use social media for educational purposes than students that very often use social media to increase academic performances, providing no support for our hypothesis that students use social media for educational purposes. The arrow bars do not touch each other. They show that there is no significant differences between the bars that are presented above. So moving forward for our shortcoming, limitation, and future studies, I'm going to start off with shortcoming, as it was difficult to attain a sample group, as I would have liked to have 20 more participants than 30. I would like to have 50 more. Then I only focus on college students. However, I would have liked to try to focus on high school students and see what their results were. And then lastly was unhonest results. You never know if a person was being honest when doing the survey. So moving forward to my further considerations, I would like to do a follow-up study, as I want to see if my hypothesis would change in a different class group, such as like high school students.
Following is at the top of technology, the new medium of online learning with the advent of a global pandemic would be my topic for study, as online learning became the main way to interact with everyone and anyone on a global level. With the new topic of learning comes the visibility of finding information with present-day topics, such as the gathering of information, the level of desirability to study, limitations of who would participate in surveys, and the validity of participants' information. As online learning became a unanimous choice for education, choosing this topic of study could be a unique look at a topic that will have a lot of information that is unique to other topics, as participants could come from what could be the largest range of participants in human history. A hypothesis that has been chosen to present was online learning can adversely affect the overall happiness of students. To gather information about online learning, the students of CSUOB were chosen from 30 participants from the ages of 18 to 24. Participants that accepted the terms and agreements for study and consented will fill out physical or digital surveys that had been provided. The information in the survey would have questions about age, gender, educational level, and Likert scale questions revolving around the research group's main topic and each individual one as well. Looking at the results, data gathered about participants' choice of classes and their level of happiness, a simple bar chart graph was used to analyze our findings of varying levels of online classes and each type of online class's level of in-person connection. Despite differing levels of online classes, varying from in-person or the online entirety classes, it was shown that there had been no significant difference as error bars had overlapped. With this research study, information about participants, GPA would have provided a more specific scale of how their academic performance was being affected. More participants would have also been useful, with an even larger range of students, not limited to the campus of CSUOB. Varying grade levels would have also yielded unique results that could not be seen on one campus alone. Following the research done on technology's effect on academic performance, both positives and negatives were found. Technology had helped provide unique situations that traditional in-person cannot, but it can also bring with it diverse problems that may be accentuated from the in-person classroom. It would appear that technology can be beneficial to the world of education, but it never take place fully what has been for the majority of humanity's history of learning.